Hi, I'm Professor Lynn Ritchey, and in this series of videos, we're going to be looking at our interactional processes. Let's begin by taking a look at perspective. What does the environment or situation look like to us? I want to begin with a short story by Arkady Avershenko called Point of View. Men are comic, she said, smiling. Not knowing whether this indicated praise or blame, I answered, "Quite true. Really, my husband's a regular Othello. Sometimes I'm sorry I married him." I looked helplessly at her. "Until you explain." "Oh, I forgot. You haven't heard. About 3 weeks ago, I was walking home with my husband through the square. I had a large black hat on, which suits me awfully well, and my cheeks were quite pink from walking. As we passed under a street light, a pale, dark-haired fellow standing nearby glanced at me and suddenly took my husband by his sleeve. "Would you oblige me with a light?" he says. Alexander pulled his arm away, stooped down, and quicker than lightning banged him on the head with a brick. He fell like a log. Awful. "Why on earth made your husband get jealous all of a sudden?" She shrugged her shoulders. "I told you men are very comic." Bidding her farewell, I went out and at the corner came across her husband. "Hello, old chap," I said. "They tell me you've been breaking people's heads." He burst out laughing. "So you've been talking to my wife. It was jolly lucky that brick came so pat into my hand. Otherwise, just think, I had about 1,500 rubles in my pocket, and my wife was wearing her diamond earrings. Do you think he wanted to rob you? A man accosts you in a deserted spot, asks for a light, and gets hold of your arm. What more do you want?" Perplexed, I left him and walked on. "There's no catching you today," I heard a voice from behind. I looked around and saw a friend I hadn't seen for 3 weeks. "Lord," I exclaimed, "what on earth has happened to you?" He smiled faintly and asked in turn, "Do you know whether any lunatics have been at large lately? I was attacked by one 3 weeks ago. I left the hospital only today." With sudden interest, I asked, "3 weeks ago? Were you sitting in the square?" "Yes, I was. The most absurd thing. I was sitting in the square, dying for a smoke, no matches. After 10 minutes or so, a gentleman passes with some old hag. He was smoking. I go up to him, touch him on the sleeve, and ask in my most polite manner, 'Can you oblige me with a light?' And what do you think? The madman stoops down, picks up something, and the next minute I'm lying on the ground with a broken head, unconscious. You probably read about it in the newspapers." I looked at him and asked earnestly, "Do you really believe you met up with a lunatic?" "I'm sure of it," he said. Afterwards, I was digging in my old newspapers, and at last I found what I was looking for, a short note in the accident column. Under the influence of drink. Yesterday morning, the keepers of the square found on a bench a young man whose papers show him to be of good family. He had evidently fallen to the ground while in a state of extreme intoxication and had broken his head on a nearby brick. In this story, we can observe 4 unique perspectives. Perspective is our unique view of a situation, and it is influenced by our cultural ideologies and value motivators. Let's take a look at these 4 different perspectives that we can observe in this story. The wife was focused on her beauty and reflected her value motivator of hedonism. The husband was focused on whether he was going to be robbed and reflected his value motivator of security. The man who wanted the light was focused on politeness and his value motivator of tradition. And the keepers of the square were interested in peace and reflected their value motivators of conformity. When you were looking at the picture of the wife, did you see a young woman or an old woman? Research suggests younger people tend to see a young woman and older people tend to see an older woman. Our statuses also influence our perspective in a situation. Let's take a look at how our perspective is shaped within a situation. George Herbert Mead developed a framework called Symbolic Interactionism that allows us to understand the interactional process. He was responding to the psychological framework of behavioralism, and the behavioralists thought humans were similar to any other animal, and all we needed to understand human behavior was to understand the stimulus, because humans, like all animals, react impulsively to a stimulus, and the stimulus will produce a particular response. George Herbert Mead thought humans were unique in their ability to import the social process into our minds. So when humans receive a stimulus, we will take time to think about the stimulus before we respond. Let's take a look at how the mind processes situational information. Mead suggests that we live in a world of objects. According to Mead, anything that is symbolically named or designated is an object. Our objects are communicated in our language, and they include both material and non-material cultural elements. And we will evaluate these objects. Are they good or bad? Objects can include our ideas and our cultural ideology, our emotions, other people, our activities, and our purposes and goals. Key here is that our environment consists of only the objects that are the focus of our attention at any given moment. Even if we are sharing the same physical space, our environment is unique because of the objects we are focused on as individuals. For example, we can look at eyewitness accounts and how unreliable they are. And this is because different witnesses are focusing on different objects in the environment. In a classroom, students might be focused on different objects. What objects are you focused on right now, both physical and non-physical? Objects are stimulus. They give us direction on how to act and behave in a situation. Objects become social objects when we interact with others and focus on the same objects. When we focus on the same social objects, we can coordinate our actions with other people. It will take two or more people to create a social object. All of our individual activities and interactions with others are based on our cultural expectations about objects and social objects. We are socialized into a world of objects and social objects that already exist in the conversations of others. As we are socialized, we learn the names of our objects and social objects. And as we interact with others, we learn how to act toward objects and social objects. Edward Sapir and Benjamin Whorf introduced the idea of linguistic relativity. They suggest that the language we use shapes our perspectives, and if we can't name it, an object does not exist. A language will also have more names for objects that are important for a culture or a people. When we listen to others, they tell us what objects and social objects are important to them. There are so many potential objects that we learn to focus on those that are most important to us. and this creates our unique perspective. Next up, we'll continue to explore the interactional process by focusing in on acts and social acts. Okay, we'll see you soon.